Welcome back. On the line with us is conservative writer and scholar, former policy analyst in the Reagan White House, Dinesh D'Souza, author of numerous books, including his latest, America, Imagine a World Without Her, soon to be a major motion picture. His website, DineshD'Souza.com. Dinesh, welcome back to the program.
Tom, good to be on as always.
Thank you. Reading through your book, there were three things that really just kind of popped the top of my head off. And each one, if I could just read two or three sentences in these three categories. One has to do with Obama, one has to do with segregation, one has to do with the 60s, to you from your book. And then you can tell me which of those three, or if all three, or, we can go from there, okay?
Yeah, let's do them one by one.
Okay, well, the first one then is you say Obama is the architect of American decline and progressivism is the ideology of America's suicide. If we think of the Titanic as symbolizing the American era, Obama wants that ship to go down. I thought progressivism was responsible for literally every forward positive motion in the history of the United States, and the conservatives had opposed it at every stage.
Well, certainly progressives have been smart to come up with the name, right? Because progress implies, gee, we're marching forward, we're going ahead. So I can see why you think that. But, think of it this way. From a termite's point of view, progress would be taking down the building. So you have to always see what the objective is. Now, here's my point about Obama. First of all, I'm not saying he hates America or is trying to get rid of America. I specify it's the American era. Now, what does the American era mean? It means the special moment in which America has been living in since the end of World War II, in which it's been almost a privileged position to be an American. We have an outsized influence in the world. We have 5% of the world's population, but use 25% of the world's resources.
I get all that, but wait a second. You're saying that progressives are trying to take us down.
Obama wants to take down. He wants to make us a normal country.
Okay, well, that would be fine with me if that was what he was all about. But here's the thing. I give you the 40-hour work week, health care, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, workplace safety protections, anti-child labor laws, the enfranchisement of women, the civil rights laws. These are all the things that progressives brought us. Please tell me one positive. No, hang on just a second, Dinesh. Hang on just a second, Dinesh. If either of us tries to filibuster the other, it doesn't work. Nobody can tell what we're saying. Please tell me one. I can give you a long list of things that progressives are responsible for in modern America. Please give me one positive thing out of the last 100 years that conservatives have been responsible for.
Well, let's start with what conservatives are conserving. They're conserving the principles of economic, religious, and political liberty that were put in place in the American founding.
One example, please.
We're conservatives, but we're conserving a revolutionary tradition that's classically liberal. So every progressive...
One example, please.
Hold on, let me finish now. You're filibustering me. Let me finish, Tom. Here's my point. You couldn't have had a civil rights movement without a Declaration of Independence. When Martin Luther King submitted his promissory note, it didn't come from the Southern segregationists. It came from Thomas Jefferson. So every progressive mark that you'd appeal to goes right back to the conservative tradition of the American
Jefferson started the Democratic Party.
1789.
Jefferson started the Democratic Party, and he was a revolutionary, and you are explicitly anti-revolutionary. But here's another...
I am a revolutionary in the sense that Jefferson was.
Okay, let me turn to page 139 in your book. You say, for some Southern conservatives, segregation was a way to protect blacks from the wrath of the Klan and other radical racist groups. You quote historian Joel Williamson, conservatives sought segregation to protect black people and their dignity. For conservatives, segregation meant giving the black person a very special place in which he would be protected. Far from putting down the esteem of black people, conservative segregation was designed to preserve and encourage it. And then you went on to say, while segregation represented a burden and imposition on blacks, it does not follow, this is you, I'm quoting your words, it does not follow that segregation by itself constitutes theft. Strictly speaking, racism cannot be a form of theft because racism is a perspective or point of view. Really?
Yeah, so here I'm referring to a prominent scholar from Stanford University who's talking about the fight over segregation laws historically in the South. Now, there were two groups in that fight. There were the radical racists, who were the Ku Klux Klan. These were the people who were, vengeful after the loss of the Civil War, and they were conducting almost, you could say, a war of extermination against blacks. So the ruling classes in the South, I'm expounding now a scholarly thesis cited in the book, says, look, the conservatives who were the ruling part, the paternalists in the South, said, listen, you know what, let's separate the races. Let's put a stop to this unending stream of violence that began before the Civil War is continuing after. So look,
so segregation, Jim Crow segregation was to protect black people.
And so you can accommodate nuance, and if I say that there were two groups in the South fighting over how to implement segregation, you're implying that I'm somehow pro-segregation. It's not true. I'm simply trying to put some nuance into history.
Okay. Here's the third one. It seems to me that in this one you are just extending Russell Kirk's hypothesis from 1951, the conservative, in his book, The Conservative Mind, that if America if the middle class continued to get wealthy, and if students could go to school for free, and people became, they were no longer terrified poor workers. If middle class wealth hit a certain point, that America would descend into chaos. And you say, speaking of the 60s, why would young people raised in a level of comfort that is historically unprecedented turn so ungrateful, so mean-spirited, so dissolute? I believe a big part of the reason is that they lost the sense of purpose that had sustained earlier generations. The children of the 1960s had nothing comparable to their parents to live for, nor did they appreciate what their parents went through. The 60s was motivated by repudiation of the old way and a quest for a new way. Liberation now came to mean liberation from old values, liberation from the spirit of 1776. I was there in the 1960s. In fact, you say in the 60s movement, you say by 1980 it was completely dead. And I would say, no, it has become us. But I was there in the 60s, and it was the spirit of 1776 that was animating those of us who were speaking out against the Johnson and Nixon administrations.
Right, but weren't you also speaking out? I agree, and of course the Vietnam War, I think looking back on it, the Vietnam War was a terrible blunder, a miscalculation of America's true interests. So I don't want to fight about that. But here's what I want to say. There was the greatest generation that came out of the Depression and World War II, and those are the guys who were your parents in the 1940s and 50s. All the venom that you spoiled brats directed toward your parents was based on a complete lack of understanding on the suffering that they went through.
But Dinesh, I'm telling you, I was there. We were not
gratitude in the 60s that you can't deny, can you?
I am. I was there. I was a member of SDS. I was in campus protests. I got pepper gas or not nerve gassed. I got I arrested in a what the East Lansing called a riot. I was there. And I was not directing venom at my parents or their generation.
Look, here's what I'm saying.
And nobody I knew was directing venom at our parents or their generation, Dinesh. We were.
I get all that.
No. We were directing venom.
Cruel. Sorry, go ahead.
We were directing venom at institutional racism in the United States. SDS, the Port Huron Statement that Tom Hayden wrote in '64, had nothing to do with the Vietnam War. It was about social justice.
Right, and the social justice was only made possible by the prosperity that you did nothing to earn, but was created by the generation preceding you.
Exactly.
Exactly. So, a little bit of appreciation toward the people who built all those things that enabled you to worry about redistributing a pie. They created the pie. They made the pie grow. So prosperity created a new circumstance in America. And I'm simply saying a little bit of understanding would have made some of you guys a little better behaved.
Better behaved. Basically, you're talking about the gay liberation movement, the black liberation movement, the women's liberation movement, all of these movements. This is what you're calling bad behavior.
No, I'm talking about burning buses, and I'm talking about disrupting the Democratic Convention. I'm talking about the meanness.
It was the police who disrupted the Democratic Convention.
I'm talking about all the obscenities and all the...
Okay, Dinesh, I'm leaving you with the last word.